Lying amongst the blood-dyed grass blades on the sloping plain of Sonlac Hill is Harold Godwinson, the fallen king of the English. The area, which had recently been the site of a civilizational defining battle, sits near silent, with the only sounds being those emitted from flies feasting on the felled corpses. Further east to this harrowed site is positioned a leader camped in the rural lands of southeastern England and basking in the glory of victory with his war-hardened and loyal soldiers. The preceding days see the leader, a prominent duke from the land of Normandy, make the necessary preparations for a campaign to subjugate the Saxon lands and claim the English throne for himself. While few Saxon elites swear allegiance to the Norman conqueror, many falter and begin fortifying their towns and cities for the oncoming storm that will inevitably erupt. With London fixated in his sights, the leader known as William of Normandy embarks on a brutal and devastating warpath to take what he sees as his ultimate prize, that of the Kingdom of England. Following the events near Hastings, the government of Anglo-Saxon England, known as the Witan, consisting of high-ranking ealdormen, aristocrats and bishops, choose young Edgar the Atheling to stand in as King of the English. Edgar, whose own grandfather Edmund Ironside had fought against King Canute's Danish invasion, is backed by important figures of the 1060s such as Stigand, Archbishop of Canterbury, Earls Edwine and Morcar of Northumbria, and Ealdred, the Archbishop of York. The young Edgar, only 15 years old at the time of his calling, remains uncrowned for the time being and thus becomes the main face of the resistance against William's Norman army. Under the impression that more high-ranking members of the Witan would submit upon the death of their king in the field of battle, William is left shocked and enraged when only a tiny minority signal their pledges of allegiance. As tension builds, William forgoes the idea of allowing any more time for diplomacy and instead looks only to punish the stubborn natives by launching an assault on the nearby town of Romney as a stark message. Upon their arrival to the town, the Normans smash through the hastily built fortifications and slaughter the inhabitants, both soldier and civilian, as well as any and all livestock found roaming the area. The small settlement is then set alight and burned to the ground. William and his men in turn spare no empathy to fleeing survivors who are pursued on horseback and cut down in the forests and fields to where they flee. According to Norman chronicler William of Poitiers, the Duke of Normandy had selected Romney due to the town's involvement in a slaughtering of a Norman party who had been blown off course at the time during the Pevensey landings and thus had met a grisly fate at the hands of the natives. Similar fates are placed upon the town of Hythe and numerous villages and hamlets across the English countryside, many of which are plundered of food and valuables first before being burned to the ground and their populations murdered. The fort of Dover, upon receiving news of the destruction at Romney and the surrounding area, surrenders to William, who in turn spares the town of a massacre but places it under his occupation and begins the construction of a new castle. A few days on from Dover, Canterbury also bends the knee to the Normans upon their swift arrival, signifying the fall of the most important religious settlement in all of England. By this time, the bulk of the Anglo-Saxon resistance gathers in London and commences the building of fortifications along roadways and bridges leading into the capital. In late October, William's lightning-fast campaign brings the bulk of his army to Southwark, a town situated south of the River Thames. With only one heavily defended bridge allowing access to the north side of the river, William reconfigures his plans for an attack on the capital and reroutes his troops westwards to hit major targets in the areas such as Surrey, Bedfordshire, Middlesex and Hertfordshire, with the aim to gradually encircle the capital and sever supply lines to the Saxon resistance. Before departing Southwark, William's forces clash with local resistance fighters led by Essigar, the Sheriff of Middlesex and a survivor from the Battle of Hastings. The Sheriff's forces stop the Normans from crossing the Southwark-London Bridge and inflicts numerous deaths on William's army. The Duke, having initially planned to offer Essigar a seat on his council upon his submission, decides to avenge his fallen soldiers and unleash fury on the town. Like Romney before, Southwark is plundered, ravaged, torched and left as smouldering ruins, and the population are butchered, fleeing from their burning homes. After the failure to cross at the Southwark Bridge, William's forces enter the boundaries of the home counties, an area known for its anti-Norman hostilities. There the army sweep through many of the towns, villages and estates, leaving behind a trail of destruction in the form of fire and fury. The intensifying nature of William's campaign sees more Norman reinforcements brought across the Channel, landing in Portsmouth before riding northwards to join the main army. Upon receiving word of the new unit's arrival, William temporarily diverts his troops southwards to link with those outside the city of Winchester. Being the capital of Wessex and the site of the royal treasury, Winchester, as with Canterbury, is regarded as a settlement of great importance to the society of Anglo-Saxon England. Despite its reputation, the city surrenders without violence and is ordered to pay a hefty sum as a contribution to the Norman war efforts. The Normans, now with two reputable cities under their occupation, advance northwards as a combined force onto Wallingford, which is attacked and plundered after minor resistance from Saxon settlers. Whilst carnage ensues, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Stigand, is spotted by Norman soldiers attempting to flee the town and is quickly captured and arrested on sight, resulting in his total submission to those who he had so staunchly opposed previously. After Stigand's submission, the Duke embarks on his penultimate and some of the most brutal acts of the campaign in accordance with his plans to sever potential supply routes for the Saxon resistance and gradually encircle London. The rural areas between Bedford and Hertford are heavily ravaged and decimated during the ride north-eastwards, and many thousands of innocents are murdered on their farms or in the small villages lying along the roadways towards the capital. In many of the captured towns and villages on the warpath, William commands the construction of castles and fortifications to prevent the chance of further pockets of resistance to recapture Norman-occupied settlements. With the outlook increasingly showing signs of despair, many civilians in London flee along the few routes still open into East Anglia or even further north towards the Midlands. Included in this mass migration of terrified refugees are Earls Edwine and Morcar, who had remained in London to build an opposing force. As the Norman encirclement from Southwark to Berkhamsted begins to close on the capital, the last leaders of English resistance, likely aware of the hopeless and desperate situation before them, finally submit to William, extinguishing the final remnants of Saxon resistance. Edgar the Atheling, the boy king placed in an impossibly difficult situation, joins many nobles, bishops and ealdormen to meet with William in Berkhamsted and formalise their surrender. William, showing morsels of mercy, spares the submissive English leaders of a violent death, and the City of London too avoids its previously speculated inevitable and wholesale destruction. With his near-perfect campaign of conquest fulfilled, at the end of November of 1066, William of Normandy makes the huge transition from a wealthy Duke of northern France to the undisputed conqueror and King of England.